Okay. Hi, my name is Evelyn Lee. I am head of workplace strategy and innovation at Slack Technologies here in the SF Bay Area. And I am a fully licensed architect and a fellow in the American Institute of Architects. And you are watching A Student's Perspective.
Hi there, and thanks for tuning in to A Student's Perspective, the weekly series that connects students with designers, manufacturers, educators, industry professionals, and design media celebrities to hear their stories on just how they've gotten to where they are now. Through our conversations, we connect the past, present, and future of design to show just how much we can learn from each other to grow towards our fullest potential without prescribed limitations. Think of A Student's Perspective as a weekly design lecture series from the student's point of view. A Student's Perspective is a division of the nonprofit University Hall of Innovation, whose goals are to connect students with the design industry through design challenges and mentorship, and a collaboration with the Marywood University Interior Architecture Program in Scranton, Pennsylvania. All interviews can be found in their video format at www.astudentsperspective.tv. For more information or sponsorship inquiries, please contact universityhallofinnovation@gmail.com.
Hi, Evelyn. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you. So you gave a little bit of a brief background in the intro, but do you want to give maybe a little bit of a background about your job that you have now, and then we can dive into your journey a little bit later?
Yeah, so I'm a licensed building architect, but I actually left traditional practice years ago now. I think it was close to 15 years. And the role I have now, frankly, has evolved over the course of the pandemic. But what many people find surprising is Slack was like any other company pre-pandemic. So everyone was expected, everyone was expected to some degree to show up at the office because everyone had an assigned desk at the office. We only had about no more than 5% of our employees were remote. So as you can imagine, when the pandemic hit, we were adapting just like everyone else. Maybe not all the architecture firms because we all had laptops, but and we had the hardware, but we were definitely trying to figure out how do we make things work? How do we not all get tired of Zoom calls? How do we find work-life balance when we are working from the same place that we are eating and sleeping and being with family? And what's interesting is Slack has this research group called the Future Forum. It's futureforum.com. And ever since May in the pandemic, they've been doing these quarterly pulse surveys of over 10,000 what they call desk workers or knowledge workers to understand changing sentiments over time. And these are middle managers and executive leaders and individual contributors. But how has their sense of belonging changed or evolved over time? How productive have they been feeling? How much burnout are they feeling? And we've been taking those research findings, a Future Forum has, and meeting with other scholars and researchers on, okay, here are our findings. How do we create new ways of working so that we can give our employees what they need or what they're asking for, which is greater flexibility, but also get the work done? So that's all great that research is happening, but somebody still has to help that get implemented in Slack, the company. So I'm taking all of those research. So we have a group called the Digital First Task Force, and collectively we take all the research that's been done and we figure out, okay, what are the flexible work policies and principles and guidelines that we want to develop as a company? How do we roll out team agreements? Because we believe that there's no one size fits all from flexible work arrangements, and we believe that it needs to be decided kind of at the team level. So how do we support various different teams coming up with team agreements around their flexible work arrangements? And then how do we share best practices, but also help our middle managers manage distributed teams in a way that they weren't trained to do previously. So it's a very long answer, but probably the shortest I can give in terms of what I do now, because it's not very straightforward.
Mm-hmm. I think that as students too, we get really excited to hear of this journey that you have, because you put in, so much into this process, and then to see like the complete shift from your education and getting to where you were then, to working in a firm and developing your own space there, to now being a part of Slack, and seeing that journey alone, I think we can appreciate so much, because we don't really know where we're going to end up in our field ever. I don't think really any of us do. I mean, even some people that we've spoken to have said, I still don't know where I'm going to end up tomorrow. As you said, you shifted the position that you have at Slack. And so I think it's just really interesting, and we appreciate seeing this view, because realistically, we don't know where we're going to end up, and that's completely okay. So it's exciting to see, somebody that is in such a successful position and has made so much for herself to now be able to explain it's okay to not know right away. And, this is where we can go later on with it, even if you don't end up in a firm specifically. So I'm really curious to know about the firm experiences that you had, and, what kind of shifted you away, maybe away is not the right word, but towards Slack and the work that you have now.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a journey. And I think when you think about all of your careers, it should be kind of, people are talking more about careers as a journey rather than a destination. I think it's taken me time over my adult years to be comfortable with kind of not knowing next steps and leaning into that, rather than trying to set these goals 5, 7, 10 years out. Because the world changes so fast. Sometimes it's hard to, if you set those goals, who's not to say that those goals will necessarily have to evolve given circumstances out of your control. So I graduated a while ago I got my undergrad from Drury University in Springfield, Missouri, which I ended up going to because they allowed me to do soccer for a little bit. And play on their women's soccer team there while I did architecture. That didn't last my whole 5 years. And then I went to SciArc to get my graduate degree. And there was a little bit of a mini recession when I was coming out. So I was really happy to just find a job. And I got a job with a firm that did a lot of big box retail. But at the time, they were also doing branding stuff, like literally designing kind of some of the branding and interior design of fast food restaurants. And I thought that would be interesting. Little did I know that part of the firm hadn't moved to California yet. So I ended up doing sited apps of Home Depots for a year. That was a bit of a slog, but I can tell you whether or not a Home Depot plan for the rest of my life has been mirrored, and whether or not they've expanded. So I left and I went and I worked for a firm that did a lot of K through 12 and community buildings, which I was really excited about because of the type of projects that they were doing. But at the time, the firm hadn't really, there were moments where we got to engage with the end users. But for instance, I learned that a lot of K through 12 schools, your end user is not your client. Your client's usually the school district, which is very different than the students that are showing up to school every day. So a lot of the meetings was directly with the school board and the school district. And I didn't get all of those touch points with the students, which is what I was kind of most excited about. So I went and I took a year. I left the K through 12 firm and I went and I worked at a nonprofit organization called Public Architecture. And at the time, they had this really interesting program where they were asking architects to give 5% of their or 1% of their billable hours towards the public good pro bono, with the thought that if a whole bunch of architecture firms did this, collectively we would have like the largest pro bono architecture design firm. And they were having a really hard time finding nonprofit organizations to partner with, mostly because the understanding that the majority of the public has of architects is that we just do ground up building, let alone kind of adaptive reuse or infill. And they also thought we had to have a building project. They didn't realize that, just by helping them rearrange their space, for instance, we can make them function more efficiently, or that just by cleaning up their space a little, that they would leave a better impression for potential donors, and they could probably, ask for more money. So those were the type of conversations I was having with the nonprofit. And I was like, we are missing, as architects, the language to talk to these people about the value that we bring to the table. So I went, and that was the time just before the Great Recession. So I went back to school and I got my MBA, my MPA. And when I came out of school, I actually took an active break from everything architecture. I'd been really involved in the AIA, and I needed, at that point, I had just gotten my license, and I had just finished this lifetime goal of becoming an architect, but I didn't feel like there was a place for me in the industry, and I needed to take a break and step away from the industry to see, is this where I still want to be? And in that break, I realized that I dearly miss not only the industry, but the people in the industry. And I think a lot of that came from my involvement within the AIA. So ultimately, I ended up at a firm called MK Think. We ran, where I help with the principal run a strategy practice. And what's interesting about MK Think is it was a smaller, medium-sized firm that is, the strategy group is looking for opportunities to extend how the services the architects deliver on both like the front and the backside of what I would consider traditional practice. So we were doing much longer engagements with clients, and it actually helped them through the recession, because they were able to bill at a different rate for those strategic services, and the clients were just calling them much earlier than they would even think to call an architect. So that was really fun. I ultimately left because I saw greater opportunity for growth to work with a friend in on workplace strategy. And then that didn't work out as planned. So I ultimately landed internally at Slack, mainly as somebody that was going to help them design systems for building their offices. But then the world kind of changed, and I have a new role. That was really long too. So feel free to cut any of that out. That isn't necessary.
No worries. Well, I feel like there's so much of the journey that often gets left out in these discussions. So we prefer, and we really appreciate that you're giving, the full how things actually happened, not just what happened, but like how it happened and how you ended up where you are, because that is almost more important than just knowing where you are now. Like how did you get to this point? And, like you said, the world is constantly changing, and we really have no control over that. The only thing we can control is how we adapt our environment to fit into this world. And I think that that's why I'm so excited about your Slack position, because you even mentioned like just cleaning up the space, and we just had a conversation about this, just, like cleaning up the space and making it feel more like a work environment that you can actually succeed in. Not everybody's work environment looks the same. I mean, even in our studio at school, everybody's desk looks completely different from one another. Although it's the same piece of furniture, we arrange it differently so that we can successfully communicate with our peers, and we can feel comfortable in our space and have like a successful workflow. So how do you actually accomplish that in your process?
Well, I think, right, I mean, the great thing about Slack and the great thing about Future Forum is we've kind of set this precedent for being a learning culture coming out, or as part of kind of all of the changes that has happened during the pandemic. So a for instance would be at the very beginning of the pandemic, everyone's like, when video conferencing was not used nearly as often, everybody was like, video cameras have to be on all the time. And then we just realized, Zoom fatigue is real. So we definitely created process and policies that we've changed, and we've come out and said very transparently, hey, we found this new research. We're going to change these policies based on not only the research, but what we're hearing from our employee base. So those type of shifts are then also what we're doing to the built environment. So I don't think offices are going to ever truly come back, unless you're at a company that's requiring your people to show up all day, every day. But I will caveat that in saying I did workplace strategy for technology companies, for healthcare companies, for finance. This is all pre-Slack, for NGOs, for nonprofit organizations. And even when we didn't have a formal return to office policy in place, it was really, really rare that I ever worked with a company that hit consistently 60% like occupancy, like of their office. So anyways, sorry, that's just to say that return to office is kind of funny because I feel like we're even placing greater boundaries around people than in some instances than we did pre-pandemic. But we believe that the return to office is going to look, based on future forum studies, and the desire for flexibility is going to look a little bit differently. So we're prototyping some things and we're testing it out, and we're getting groups in our office that are interested in prototyping things to test them out with us. And then we're going back and asking them, hey, did this work? What needs to change? And if they're really excited about it, we'll get them to be our kind of evangelists and get other people to come in and prototype. And if they're not excited about it, you know what? We tried it, we understand what didn't work, we learned from it, we'll move on. So one of the things that so it was publicly announced last week that Slack is closing down their offices. But one of the things that we were interested in creating is what we were calling a broadcast booth. So not dissimilar from the room I'm in, but really meant to help our sales team, like create an environment for our sales team members where they show up amazing on camera. They have amazing audio. They're not like me schlepping a podcast mic into the office because all of the equipment and the lighting is set up there to make them look great on camera whenever they're presenting. So spaces like that, I don't think we ever really thought about pre-pandemic, but that was one of the spaces that we were going to try post-pandemic. And then I think we're really looking at, if the office is truly a place for collaboration going forward, then what are the various different collaborative spaces and what type of activities are people doing when they come together to collaborate? Because a room where you have a strategic session in and you're working on maybe a lot of Post-its is going to look very different from a room where you're just trying to do some team building exercises in. So we're identifying new space types too.
And I'm loving that you mentioned like the shift and moving from, home to office, and, that not everyone has moved and plans to move from home to office, because realistically, the pandemic changed our lives in different ways for everybody. And not everybody is thinking, okay, I need to be in office. I was able to share my knowledge from home, and I was able to successfully, display these ideas how I needed to so that they can be communicated with the next step in the process. So just understanding like the space itself is important, but so is understanding what the space is for, and understanding like how can we create this space from home? How can we create this space in a physical office? How can we create the space on Zoom if it's possible? That sort of communication and links. So I'm appreciating the honesty of all of this process, for sure.
Yeah, I think especially Stuart. So Stuart was our founder of Slack, and he just stepped down, which wasn't unexpected after we got acquired by Salesforce. But, he was such an amazing leader, and I think he led with trust and transparency. And if anything, we tend to over communicate, not only to our employees, but if you are to follow any company's, I think, social media channels, you should I would encourage students to follow Slack's on social media, just because they're actually really entertaining. And every time Slack goes down, because it inevitably happens, there's a time that Gmail goes down, there's a time Facebook goes down, Instagram, whatever. But every time Slack goes down, people get on LinkedIn and say, Slack just had a masterclass on how to treat customers when an incident like that happens. And they are so responsive to people in the best conversational way. When people are frustrated with our product, it's just that outward expression definitely translates inward in terms of the employee culture and the employee experience that we try to build at Slack.
Yeah, I think also in I can argue that in any really position of ours, it's so important to have good communication, and in the design field as a whole, especially if you are working with a group, because realistically, it's not something that we can do alone. We need the client to be a designer. You're not a designer if there's no client. We need a team to actually form the designs that actually come about. So seeing that they do it in a fun way, I think that's really interesting, because at the end of the day, you do have to have great communication, and to have it in an interesting way, as you're explaining that they do. I think we can all appreciate that, and learn from that, even if it's a form of communication that we learn in this, and then bring it into office or into our studio culture that we have here. It's great to have that opportunity.
Yeah, and one thing I think that doesn't get kind of stated enough is, in addition to that communication, it's really about building trust, right? So if you think about even a student's willingness to speak up during a crit or in class, or an intern's ability to kind of find their own voice in a firm and say hey, why, to even ask the question, why does the firm do this thing this certain way? They have to trust that. Well, they have to be in a safe space, one, to feel that they can communicate, but they also have to have trust and faith that there's an active listener on the other end that's going to be responsive to anything that they do communicate. What I really struggled with in kind of the return to office, and everybody saying there's a lack of culture, or in person is the only way that we can spur these innovative ideas. The only metric that has actually resulted in greater innovation and greater innovative thought on the other side that has been measured is trust. Because if you don't have any trust, and you're still telling people to show up at work and telling people to we're going to be innovative because we're all in the office, but no one feels like they have the ability to speak up or say anything, then really how much innovation is actually going to happen, even if they're all in the office?
Yeah, that's trust. I feel should be a key word. Trust and respect for the entire group is so important. And you're so right that we do overlook that, I think, a little bit, and say okay, well, how do I give this confidence to people so that they do feel welcomed enough to ask questions? Because it's okay to not know, as long as you're willing to learn. So if you don't know until you ask the question, and I think if you're not safe enough to ask the question, then you normally just go on not knowing or researching it on your own time. So I think, and in all of our environments that we're in now, and then going forward, we are all going to be in internships at one point or another. So understanding that, it's okay to ask that question, and it's okay to realize that you need that trust for your relationship with your coworkers to actually be successful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that piece of advice, because I would have never really thought of it in that way.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think it is something that the firm has to give you guys. So that's where the leaders have to kind of work in, and they have to enable and create that culture of trust, which comes with I feel comes with a bit of informality. An example is one of our VPs used to start every meeting with, "Here's where I am today," and like, my kid woke up sick, so he's in the background. Like, we had to keep him home, but I think that opened the door for others to be like, okay, here's where my mindset is today, and it's okay, because we're only human, to not be on 100% of the time. But for leaders to initiate that trust, which is probably counterintuitive to how leadership has been taught in the past, it is kind of leading with a little bit of informality and sharing more than they might have been previously like comfortable sharing before.
Yeah, that's so true too. I feel like when professors in class, even when they're just like, oh, like this is the situation that I'm in today, that's so true, because then you're like willing to actually, it feels more of a conversation than like somebody talking at you. It's like, oh, okay, well, now I can relate to you. We're all human at the end of the day. We experience different life things, and that's totally okay. But it's great to have that form of communication and that, I guess, like creation of connection before you even jump into anything.
Mm-hmm.
Going back a little bit to your journey that you've had. So you were licensed, I believe, before you've furthered even more education. What did that look like for you?
It was a really hard decision to make, because I think I was one of those weird people that knew from a very young age, without fully knowing what it meant, that I wanted to be an architect. But I liked the path it set me on, because I was like, because as I grew up and I learned over time, it means like, oh, I should go to an accredited program. Immediately after I get out of school, I need to make sure I'm pursuing my IDP hours. Then I have to take these tests. Like, I knew what I was going to do next for the foreseeable future. So that was like a very easy goal to pursue. But then, doing like cited apps for Home Depot and working on K through 12, but really not getting to talk to the end users. I was like, I was at a point in my career where I was really questioning, what do I want to do? I've never been a good designer. I mean, I fully admit that as early as undergrad. There's definitely people that were much better designers out there. I like to say I like to design systems, or businesses, or operations, process, and policies is the boring way to say all of that. That's what I really geek on and get excited about. So I was trying to figure out, like, what is knowing this information, where is my place in the industry? And, a lot of my mentors were even, you just need to stay the path. You can still do partnership. You can work on business development. You can work on the marketing side if you go to a large firm. But I don't know. I was seeking a different answer that I wasn't able to find with any of my current mentors. So school for me was a way to kind of take a break and reassess and reevaluate. And I've talked to a lot of people about going back and getting their MBA. That question comes up a lot. And for me, it was just the right time. I didn't have family. I was unattached. Like, I was looking anywhere in the US, really key at the program to understand where I want to go and get my MBA. And I was like happy to move wherever that journey took me. So it was an active way to kind of reassess where I was headed in the future. It was kind of scary, but I felt like I just went on this 12-year-long journey for licensure, maybe longer. Using 2 years of school to figure out a different path is like, it's not that scary. And I feel like I'll be gaining new skills. So that's kind of the decision I made to go into school. What was harder was the decision to step away from architecture, though, because I think because of all the time that I had given to the industry and the profession at that point. But again, I didn't feel like there was a place for me, and I didn't feel like I fit in.
Yeah, I think a lot of people experience that too. From one point or another, it's just everybody kind of like goes about it in a different way. And I think that it's amazing that you took the opportunity and you said, you know what, I'm at a point in my life where I can make this journey. I am scared and I don't know where it's going to take me, but you realized, you know, like in some way before you knew where you were going to be, you realized this is a decision that I just need to act on. And in doing that, you know, you ended up in a position that you seem to really, really love. So it's great to have that feeling of, okay, that jump was worth it. It was terrifying, but I did it. It was worth it. And of course, we're going to have a few more jumps down the line. We never know when life's going to change. But yeah, just having that. And the chronological order that goes is always interesting for everybody, because I feel like some people go right into their master's, and some people years and years and years and years down the line, they're like, you know what, I think I want to actually try something new. And that's completely okay. Having like either of those journeys is okay. It's what gets us to, you know, the happiest that we are in that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and then in terms of, you have another position, I'm not sure if you're still fulfilling that, but the Architect Magazine journalist position, are you still writing for that?
Yeah, so the editor at both Contract and Architect Magazine has changed over time. So you should see some articles coming out soon from Architizer now, which will be fun because I feel like they have a different type of audience and a bigger reach. But I've always loved writing, and architects aren't necessarily known for being the best writers or narrative storytellers. So I feel like that's definitely a way that I've used to kind of help the industry, push the industry along a little bit in a way that writing has given me the platform to talk about how we share our value, but also it's become a platform later in my life about how I think the profession needs to evolve to remain relevant. So I started getting paid for writing, I don't know, back in 2003 or 2004, writing for Inhabitat, before like people believed you could make a living of blogging, right? So way back then, and it's just something that's remained consistent in my life. So and I publish, I don't know, I guess it's short form, like little thoughts to LinkedIn too, if you want to follow me over on LinkedIn. But I'm not just resharing posts. I'm trying to kind of deliver value through storytelling and through writing.
Yeah, there's a lot of students right now that I know that they're kind of a little bit aligning with what you're saying. You know, you're playing your strong suits, and you're saying, okay, you're clearly great with, you know, communication, and that's something that you value, and you're great with construing information in a way that like makes sense to people, communicating in a way that is like enjoyable, really. And there's a lot of students that are here that are great at architecture and they're great at design, but their interests and their strong suits really lie in communication and in their like narratives of their work. Like I'm almost more intrigued by their narrative and how they wrote what they were working on and how they display their work. Unfortunately, that is not me, but I do have friends that help me with my narratives, and they say, well, this looks like what you're trying to get at. And I'm like, you're 100% right. Thank you for putting words to, you know, my madness sometimes. But I think it's important for us to play to these strong suits, because then it opens up a whole new world of opportunities. Like you have this knowledge of architecture, and you're licensed, and you have all of the knowledge that comes with that. But someone has to, you know, have communication for architects, because a lot of us, our work comes in sketches. It doesn't come in words. So to be able to have that, it really makes a team effort a lot easier and a lot more effective.
Yeah. And a lot of what I'm trying to a lot of it is what lessons did I learn from business school, from outside of the profession, that I think it would be helpful for architects to know and consider, like within their own practices. Because it's funny because every firm practitioner or firm principal is like they identify as architect firm principal first, but a part of that is you run a firm. So whether or not you want to come out and say it, but a piece of you is a business owner and an entrepreneur, and you have certain responsibilities as a business owner and entrepreneur. And I think as a whole, the profession, there's definitely bright shining stars in our profession, but we tend to kind of navel gaze when it comes to business operations and practice management. And that's where I'm trying to say, like, look, there's all of these companies doing these really amazing things. We're not so different from them that we can't learn from them. And how do we apply it to practice? And ultimately, especially for the younger generation that's entering practice, like, what does that mean for their experience in working in our firms? And how can we give them an experience where they want to stay and grow in a way that I didn't actually think was available when I was younger and growing up in an architecture firm.
Yeah, I think that's what's so important about, a student's perspective and the conversations that we have with you guys, because realistically, coming into school, we have no idea how many opportunities are actually out there in this field. Like you wouldn't expect to have so many different opportunities that actually fit to what you're capable of fully providing. And I think that having these honest conversations, they just are so beneficial for students to see that, you might not end up where you think you're going to end up, but this is, you can play to your strong suits and be in a successful position that you're comfortable with, even if you have to step back for a second and reevaluate and see, like, what am I actually truly interested in? And it's also really interesting that you incorporated business in this way, because a lot of students do take business classes while they're in their undergrad. Like, I know I have a few friends that are taking business classes, and it's great because it gives you a fresh perspective, I guess, every single time that you're going into these situations and learning about all of these completely different information that somehow all connects back to, like, whether you say it or not, if you were working in a firm or you're owning a firm or whatever you're doing there, you are in business. So you have to know something of that nature to be confidently moving forward in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit AIA. So I know that there's quite a bit that they provide for students. What does that actually look like?
So for students, I would say there's AIAS, right? The American Institute of Architecture Students, which is actually a separate, they're their own separate 501c3, which is very different than the AIA, which is a 501c6 technically. I believe your fourth or fifth year, though, whenever you start interning during your summers, you're able to be an associate member with the AIA if you're interested in joining a local component. And what it offers you as an associate member, I think it really varies. And I guess, the thing that I have to say about any professional organizations, I had a friend that used to talk about participating in professional organizations the same way you talk about getting a gym membership. Like, you're going to get a lot more out of it the more you put into it. So for me, as an emerging professional, so I was an AIAS member, and then I didn't really join the AIA until I graduated. But what it's been given, it gives you the opportunity, especially if you have a really supportive firm environment, to lead committees or lead kind of these mini projects or programs that you might not otherwise get an opportunity to do in your firm environment. And for me, it was a safer place to test things, to fail, to understand and to grow leadership skills and speaking skills that I might not have gotten the opportunity to do until much later in a firm. Run groups, run committees. So that's where I've personally gained the most out of the AIA. But really, it's also for me about just the camaraderie, about having like-minded people that are really interested in like making a difference and changing the profession and being active in it, and being a part of that conversation.
Mm-hmm. That's great too, because it seems like you can stay a student forever if you're a part of this. You can still be learning and trying, and it's okay to, not fail, but it's okay to have something not work and try to problem solve to figure out how to succeed as you would as a student, because you are forever a student in your career field, but I think it's a little bit more intimidating to fall in your career field. So it's nice to have a space where, you feel a little bit safer to fall. That's really
Yeah. And I think, there's been a lot of students that like, oh, how do I find a mentor? When I get out of school. First of all, I would say that I have had many mentors over the course of my life. And it's really, for me, if I'm going to be completely honest, like these mentorship programs, while all good intentioned, the best mentors in my life have really developed organically over time. And that's all come from just participating and being active in these various different committees where I've met other people that are much further along in their careers. And we've kind of come to a mutual understanding and a friendship. But those are the mentorships that have really helped me over the long term, rather than kind of getting smashed together arbitrarily in these mentoring groups. We don't know if you have a connection with the person that you've been matched with. Absolutely, sometimes those things work out. I just think it's less natural than just kind of finding a rhythm. And if you are putting yourself out there and you're constantly showing up in these places where there's other people that are further along in your career than you, especially as a student and emerging professional, then engaging with those individuals, reaching out for them for help on your portfolio or resume review or even a job search just becomes so much easier. And you'll look back and you'll be like, oh, I actually had X number of mentors because of that. And you'll even have people that you call because you know their strengths, right? So you'll, like the person that I talk to about career switching and entrepreneurship and practice is very different than the person that I talk to about like being a mother and practice and what does that look like paving a way forward. So you also need like kind of different mentors and their different experiences to support you in a variety of ways. Yeah,
even in like life things, like you said, you know, not all architects have kids. So in looking for a mentor in that way of how do I, navigate this professional world at the same time as, giving all that I can as a parent, or like you mentioned before, as an athlete, like there's different aspects of our lives that, we do need quite a bit of help from time to time, and knowing, I think, like who is capable of giving that in what way is great, because, and especially learning how to do that and how to navigate those connections, because then we can do that throughout like projects and all of that. Because like realistically, there's people that we know that like in trying to set up, we were just trying to set up an exhibit here, and not everybody's great with their hands, but there's a lot of people that are great with digital softwares. So, coming together and say, hey, can you help me with this? You're not going to ask the same person for the same thing realistically. So seeing that as students, like that it's okay to, like reach out. And we're even I believe we're finding mentors now, even of just seeing, making connections and then reaching out to people when we know their strong suits, which is a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, and professors absolutely make great mentors throughout your career too. So a lot of people I know like still have their favorite professors that they always have reached out to at various different times in their career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that there's connections are kind of everywhere, which is strange to think of, but even, in daily life and in daily practice, like how you mentioned that when you were working through the school system and you were specifically working with the school board, if we have those connections with everyday people in those areas, that alone could be a connection that we could make and then, learn from and see what the needs for that sort of situation would be. You go to a coffee shop every day and then you're asked to design a coffee shop and you ask the barista, what do you think would best be suitable for a successful coffee shop? So knowing not just mentors of a professional sense, but mentors and even just people that you can have these conversations with and learn from. It's really exciting. I think that's one of the best things about our career is that you can really make connections anywhere and learn from anybody, really.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So, and speaking of the communication forum, you also are part of a podcast. You're still in that, I believe, because that's where the setup came from.
Yeah. So Janine Chastain and I, Janine Chastain is also a consultant to architects. I have a side business called Practice of Architecture, which I can only take on a handful of firms every year because I have a full-time job. But it's essentially business strategy for small to medium-sized architects. Janine tends to focus on leadership development, and I would say ultimately talent retention through apostrophe consulting. But together, we run a podcast called Practice Disrupted. We have over 100 episodes, over 25,000 listeners globally, and we do 40. So we do 2 seasons every year. Each season is 20 episodes, and we're on season 6 currently. Mm-hmm. And we have a new episode comes out every Thursday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And the podcast it's called Practice Disrupted. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. So you could go to practicedisrupted.com, or you could do practiceofarchitecture.com/podcast. And you should be able to find it on any of your favorite streaming channels.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So I will bring us into our final question. So if you could go back in time and give your student self a little piece of advice, what piece of advice would that be?
I would say, I think it's, taking this full circle, lean into the journey. It's okay if you haven't figured everything out from the beginning. But another additional piece of advice that I would give to students, because it took me a little while to realize this, is focus on, or as you're going through your work life, identify, and even your student work life or student life, identify those things that give you that really give you the most energy and get you the most excited. So I had a strategic scenario planning semester at SciArc while I was a master's, where I got my master's. And if I think about what I'm doing today and the excitement that I had when I was going through that studio, I think I would have gotten to where I am today sooner. I'm happy with the path I took. It took a little longer, but I think if you pay attention to what gives you excited, what gives you the most energy, then you can begin to identify, like, okay, this is where I need to focus my career on. This is what I'm most excited about. I think it seems like such an easy thing, but I think it's also easy to get wrapped up on, I'm getting licensed, I'm trying to make my tests. I have deadlines, that it really kind of takes an effort sometimes to step back and be like, okay, what is draining my energy and what is giving me my energy, and how do I follow the sources that give me energy?
Yeah, that's a great point, because that makes us, I think anybody can really reevaluate a situation and say, okay, let me step back for a second. It's very difficult to do, especially when you're so consumed in the deadlines and making sure that you have everything done to the fullest abilities that you can, and trying to give 100% to 10 different things. Oh, sorry, I threw a pen. Yeah, so I definitely think that having that opportunity and understanding that and being able to step back is great for us. And I think I'm going to have to definitely do that myself, just to see what I'm actually most excited about, because I think that's where, at the end of the day, we find most of our drive from.
Yeah, and I think it can help you with even the smallest decisions, because I know a lot of architects that are like coming out of school and they just kind of want to find work. And then I ask them, well, where do you want to find work? Like what are you most interested in? And then they'll give me a long list of like, I'm interested in hospitality and education and residential and, but it's like, but what are you actually most interested in? Like what is truly going to make you happy in the end? And then I think you have to be realistic about like, okay, is that something that I can do right now? Or is that something I need extra training to pursue? Is that something that, given the climate of where things are right now, it's just harder for me to make the jump and I need to accept any job that comes my way? Like then you can make that decision, but like do take the time to understand like what makes you most excited. Because then you'll ultimately be able to create a path to follow that.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at our career as a whole too. What are you most excited about? And in the small details, growing all the way up to the bigger details. That's great. So
yeah. And also being it's okay for you to change your mind, because you are human. And what made you excited about life in your 20s might be very different than what makes you excited about life in your 30s, especially after you have family and other things. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
That's a great piece too, because we've said it multiple times, but we're constantly changing, and that's what makes life great. But that's also, something that we have to reacclimate to every once in a while. So understanding and stepping back every once in a while and seeing what am I prioritizing, what makes me happy, what gets me excited. Yeah, that's a great outlook on it. Thank you for that. Okay, thank you so much, Evelyn, for joining today, and thank you everyone for joining. If you enjoyed this conversation, give it a like, comment, and follow, and join us next week as the conversation continues from a student's perspective.
We hope you liked this discussion with the design industry from a student's perspective. Please like, share, and comment, and stay tuned for more inspiring conversations to come.